Hey team, Luke with Crusader Machining. Oh, almost had a little spill. This should be for the blooper reel. Luke with Crusader Machining here, back for another coffee talk. Hot, delicious, bitter black coffee on a beautiful sunny fall day. In this coffee talk, I want to name this one Stories from Grandpa. My grandpa, my father's father, well, it's interesting because my mother's father, my maternal grandfather, was in the machining world as well, but from the engineering perspective. He worked for a company called Phoenix Engineering or something like that in Naperville. But he lived in Indiana at the time, I think. But the main thing I want to talk about today is my paternal grandfather, Larry. He was my dad's father. Wonderful, wonderful, lovely, warm, kind, caring, funny man. His nickname was Giggles. My grandma would call him Gigs. And because he would laugh a lot and joke a lot. But he was a machinist through and through, and he was a great one. And he shared a lot of stories with me. We worked together for a short time, and he would share stories with me about his time in the world of manufacturing in Chicago. I come from a long line of wonderful machinists. My father doesn't work in the shop now with us. I work with him every day. But he doesn't work in the shop anymore, but he did. He was a great machinist on cam-driven screw machines, multi-spindles, New Britain and/or Acme Gridley back in the 70s. And my grandfather was all screw machine, Brown and Sharp. But some cool stories he told me. One of them was when he was a young man, I think between 13 to 16, maybe 14 or 15, he lived in Chicago on the south side. And the place that he worked at, and keep in mind, he's like 14, 15 years old at this time. I think he made it through like 7th grade or 8th grade school. And he worked at a stamping house on the other side. He would go from the south side to the north side, or lived in the north side and would travel to the south. And he worked at a stamping house. And he would either take a bus or a trolley or some way to get back and forth to work every day as a kid. But the cool story he told me is frequently when he was on his way home, frequently when he was on his way home, he would stop for beers with his coworkers who were grown men. And I picture my grandfather, Larry Giggs, stopping at the bar on his way home at 14 or 15 years old, sitting at the bar being served alcohol. That I thought was always a funny story at such a young age. And he told me this when I was 15. I couldn't imagine having a full-time job, traveling in the city by trolley or by bus alone to get to my job. And then a few of my adult coworkers saying, "Hey son, let's go get a drink." "All right, sure, let's go." And he said it was beer, and he didn't care for beer. He was a whiskey guy. That was pretty cool. Another cool story he told me is he worked at a shop running Escomatics, real small screw machines. Some would call them sliding headstock. I think they are sliding headstock machines. And I kind of conflate these two stories, so I don't know if this was Brown and Sharp screw machines or Escomatics, but he was working in a shop where they were machining silver, a precious metal, literal silver. And every day when he would get done working, when he would show up, they would look to make sure around his machine if there was any chips. And at the end of the shift, his foreman at the time would go to the machine and scrape off all the chips and put them in a hand and make sure that the employees weren't taking any of the parts home. Again, I think that was pretty cool. He said these Escomatic, the shop that he worked at, they were almost like benchtop style machines. And they were so close together that to get between the machines, he'd have to suck in his stomach to walk between. They had them so tightly compacted in the shop that you could barely walk through. And he said all day's production of what he made you could fit in the palm of your hand and barely see them because they were all really, really small parts. And I look back and think about my grandpa. He had passed away a few years ago, God rest his soul. And I'm now third generation machining. Some say fourth because he learned from his uncle or something like that. But I don't know that to be true. What I do know is my grandfather, his two sons, my father Dave and my uncle Ken, were machinists. And then I am now, and my brother David does. My other brother Shane, he was for a while in a shop. And then now I work with a couple of my boys here, one of them who's 19 and he works full-time, and my other son who works part-time as he has time. And that's 4 generations, man, starting from my grandfather and the company that him and my dad started, which is, I mean, it's wonderful. And I really cherish those stories, and I wished if I could go back, I would sit down with a pad and paper and write down every story that he could told me. He told me so many more. I just wanted to cover a couple of those. I don't want to drag this out to be an hour and a half snooze fest, you know. But I cherish those memories with him. And like I said, he was a great man, a very fun man, very caring and warm. But most importantly, he was a great machinist. He was wonderful. I'm just kidding about the most importantly part. But he was a great machinist, and him and I would work together. I'd sit in his office and we would just chat. And he'd ask me about the machining technology today when we got Swiss, and it would just blow his mind. And he'd see the different parts we make and ask how we made it. And he was all cam driven, you know, cam driven screw machines, and you know, your spindle speed was set by gears. You know, you'd open up the back of the Brown and Sharp that my uncle showed me years ago. You'd open up the back of the Brown and Sharp, and they have different gear formations that you would put in to set your RPM. And those are also great memories, being just a young little squirt, learning that with my uncle and my dad and even my grandfather. But that's the coffee talk for today. Enjoy a hot cup of warm, black, delicious, disgusting coffee. This is Luke at Crusader Machining for a coffee talk. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.